Support for the Capital Connection comes from
United University Professions, representing 37,000 academic and professional employees at SUNY campuses and teaching hospitals across New York State. Frederick E. Cole, President, uupinfo.org. And New York State United Teachers, representing professionals in education and healthcare, online at nysut.org.
It's the Capital Connection. Hi, I'm Alan Chartock. Joining us this week is Republican New York State Assembly Minority Leader Will Barclay. Leader Barclay, good to have you back with us. It's always a pleasure. You're a bright guy, and it makes it easy for us.
Well, thanks for having me on. I always enjoy this show.
Well, before we begin, I wanted to say I was glad to see you were invited to the governor's inauguration earlier this month.
I am giving you full credit for that. I was saying about 2 hours after that show, our last show aired, I got a call from the governor, and she congratulated me on being reelected as minority leader, invited me to her inauguration, and also said she wanted to sit down and have a meeting, which I look forward to doing. So I give you full credit for that, Alan. Thank you.
Is that because, remind me, that you were fetching on the show about contact with her?
Yeah, I was. I was.
Exactly.
Initially, when she first got, she took over for Cuomo.
Right.
She had the inauguration. Neither Orton nor myself were invited, so we thought that was maybe short-sighted, and so she remedied that, and I look forward to having a good conversation meeting with her.
Do you miss Cuomo?
No, I don't. Although he, interestingly, where I would agree with him from time to time is his pushback on some of the far left progressives that we have in the legislature. And I worry, although it's interesting how Hochul will do, and particularly with the LaSalle judge, controversy, I sometimes wish that she would push harder back on those progressives. And I thought prior to the election that she was caving on a lot of issues, particularly on crime and bail. I'm optimistic, especially during her State of the State, where she had brought up crime, out-migration, the cost of living, et cetera. Those are issues that my conference and the Republicans have been hammering on for some time. I'm glad that she's recognizing those are problems. We'll see what the solutions are, and if she uses any political capital to try to, whether it's bail reform or something to do with cost of living or whatever she does, if she uses some political capital to push back on us, some of the progressive policies that we've implemented in the state.
Well, Leader Will Barclay, I guess the question I want to use as a follow-up is, what do you find particularly offensive about those who have a more, quote, progressive orientation?
Well, I don't know if I find it offensive. I would take, I just don't believe from an ideological standpoint that what they're proposing is the right steps for New York State. Now, as you know, over the last decade or so, we've lost 1 million people from New York, and I think over the last 2 years, we've lost 400,000 people. People are leaving the state because it costs too much to live here. We have a crime issue, and they don't feel like Albany is, implementing policies that are addressing these issues. So it's not so much that I have, I don't find them offensive. I think they believe in what they're pushing. I just think they're the wrong policies for New York.
Well, Will Barclay, if you had to go somewhere, if somebody said, okay, Will, you got to go now. You got to go to a different place, different state. Where would you go?
Alan, I wouldn't leave New York. I'm the 8th generation of my family to live in Alaska, where I live. My boys are the 9th generation. I can't leave. Who wants to break that streak? So that never even crosses my mind of leaving. But I do understand why people do it. They feel like they can't afford to live here. They don't feel like the opportunity is here. And a lot of them are going to other states like Florida, I don't know if they're living in New York or Texas, but I know California, people are leaving to go to Texas because I think they feel like they have better opportunities in those states, and people are moving with their feet, So I don't know where I would go. I'm not leaving New York, I guess. And we have great people here. So there's a lot of positives about New York that make me not want to leave, and I'm proud to be a New Yorker. However, we do have challenges.
What about crime and taxes? Everybody always talks about crime, taxes, dog poo, everything else that you could possibly name. How do you answer them?
I'd say we do have a crime problem. And, we try to raise the issue of crime and we get called fear-mongers from time to time. But the statistics bear out that we definitely have a crime problem. I think New Yorkers understand that. You saw that Siena poll the other day that said 93% of New Yorkers are concerned about crime. But when you see shootings in New York City from 2019 to 2022 are up something like 66%. Murders are up 37% in New York City. And Syracuse shootings are up during that same time period, up 71%. Buffalo homicides are up 42%. In Rochester, homicides are up 124% during that time period. So you can't say that's fear-mongering. We definitely have a crime problem. I happen to believe that's not all totally due to, but is due to some of the, criminal justice reforms. They call them reforms, but I don't even call them reforms. Usually you think of reforms as making something better, but nevertheless, I think it's bail reform. I think it's raise the age, and that, as I said before, I think it's this anti-police narrative out there. And unfortunately, my colleagues across the island, particularly the hard left progressives, want to go further. They want to do clean slate. They want to give up qualified immunity for police. So they want to double down on this. But I think politically, there's going to be a pushback. There has been a pushback. I think the last election showed there was, with Zelen almost being Hochul, and I think Hochul understands it, as she says in her State of the State, that we're going to have to look back at some of these policies and make changes to them.
Joining us this week is Republican New York State Assembly Minority Leader Will Barclay. Leader Barclay, so what is it that keeps you in New York State? I mean, there are so many problems. What makes you stay here?
Well, it's what I said. This is a great state. It's the Empire State. I think region to region, we have one of the best, most beautiful state. I think, what are we, about 30th maybe in geographic size, but the diversity that we have is really tremendous. And and the people are great, but it's tough. The policies coming out of Albany make it very tough for anybody to continue to be a New Yorker.
So, Leader Barclay, Judge Hector LaSalle, Governor Hochul's pick for top judge in New York, was voted down by the State Senate Judiciary Committee. This put the Democratic governor at odds with her own party, and she received support from many Republicans, even you, correct?
Yes, even though I don't, in the Assembly, we don't have a vote on it. But I think it's very dangerous. I mean, obviously, each party or whoever's in power is going to probably choose a judge of their, partisan persuasion. And LaSalle, no one's saying he's a hardcore Republican, but it seems like the Democrats just put such a litmus test on it, and the fact that he's not liberal enough for the Democrats in the Senate. Really, ultimately, isn't it the governor who gets the choice, and with the advice and consent from the Senate, and the fact that they seem to want to choose their own candidate. I guess they don't feel like LaSalle is far enough left for them, which I think is really a bad precedent to set.
So what's going to happen?
Well, that's a great question. Whether she sues or not, I'm predict that she doesn't. I think they pass down. They try to find another judge, I suppose. But she could sue, and her claim, I think there's some good legal ground that it can't just be chosen by the decision can't be made by committee, but yet the vote has to go to the full Senate. I would like to see that happen just from a presidential standpoint, but I think this politically, ultimately, she doesn't pursue this, and they just move on.
We're also hearing the fight over the top judge pick is impacting the budget process negatively. So what are you hearing?
Well, obviously the governor has yet to propose her budget, so whether that's the LaSalle situation or something else, it is late. I mean, where are we? Almost through January. I think usually it comes out, constitutionally has to come out earlier in January. So whether that's impacting, but something's going on, and we have to get moving on. That's the biggest thing we do in state government is addressing the budget. We got some tough issues to face in New York, and we should get going on it.
And of those issues, what's most contentious in your mind?
Well, we'll see. I want to see what the proposal is. Obviously, again, some of my colleagues, particularly from the city, want to increase taxes, income taxes, and that would be, I think, a disaster to do. The governor has said that she doesn't believe that we should be raising taxes. I think this year, from a budget standpoint, we're going to be all right because I think the revenue is still pretty good in the state. But outer years are going to be tougher. We lost a lot of federal aid that we got during the COVID pandemic. When that aid, has been pulled back, we're going to have to make very tough choices when it comes to spending in New York.
We're talking with Assembly Minority Leader William Barclay now, and as we have in the past, who's always been here for us, and we appreciate it very much. So Governor Kathy Hochul reiterated her support for New York's 2019 bail reforms in her State of the State speech, but says improvements are needed. And the Democrat was narrowly elected in November to a full term after a campaign that largely centered on public safety. But she says giving judges more leeway to hold in jail someone accused of serious violent crimes makes sense. You've talked about this very issue with us on the Capital Connection. So what's your reaction to all of this? Do you think that we're heading in the right direction?
Well, we haven't, but I agree with the governor. Can you believe me saying this? But I believe I am backing the governor on that proposal. And I think you'd question most people, New Yorkers, would say, yeah, that seems like a common sense change. Other states that have implemented so-called bail reform, like New Jersey, they do have a dangerous standard. So if the person is a danger to the community, that the judge can set bail. And why we got rid of that and stripped that power away from judges, I think has had terrible consequences in New York.
Well, so give us, the real stuff here. What's behind this? If it makes no sense, why are we doing it?
Well, why don't we reform it? I just think it's, politically, obviously, it's the progressives, hard left members of the legislature that want to admit that they made a mistake and won't want to change the bail law. I think that's the problem. And the numbers are there. It's very tough to get these things done. In fact, they want to double down. As I said, they want to do further so-called criminal justice reforms like clean slate, getting rid of qualified immunity for police, etc.
Could you stop right there and explain those two you just mentioned, clean slate and others?
Well, clean slate would essentially erase any criminal record from anybody except for very few crimes. So, the one I always point to is why would you want to not know that someone's been convicted of DWI if they're applying for a bus driving job or some sort of public transportation driver. So I think that is, problematic. Listen, we want to give everybody a second chance. I think that's human nature, and we hope the best out of people, but it doesn't mean we want to just put our heads in the sand and not know what someone's history is when it comes to criminal. Qualified immunity means you can't sue a police person for their on-the-job duties, and there's that protection in place because they have to make very tough decisions from time to time. You have to think of a self-defense or a shooting incident. Police have to make split-second decisions, and they can't be held accountable always for those types of decisions. There should be give them immunity from having private lawsuits brought against them. Right?
Well, I have hired many people at the radio station that I run and other places, and I want to know if they've got a criminal history. Is that wrong of me?
No, I think it's absolutely right. And it doesn't mean you can't go ahead and hire them.
No.
But particularly, I mean, and, you think about what we do in our jobs, and maybe that's not, is as important to know their criminal history. But when it's specifically related to what the job they're going to do, and I take the example as a DWI, if someone has 3 or 4 DWIs, you certainly don't want to hire them as a bus driver. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I don't think it's not so much giving someone second chance, but my goodness, or, I don't know whether other crimes are out there, but when it's specifically related to the job they're applying for, you should certainly know their background. And to wipe that clean makes no sense to me.
So you agree with Kathy Hochul when she says giving judges more leeway to hold in jail someone accused of a serious violent crime makes sense, right?
I do, completely. And that's something we've been calling for. Right as soon as bail reform was instituted, we said that was one of the changes. What we have to do, Alan, I think probably what's most egregious, because very often it gets painted as a partisan issue, which it really isn't, is listen to law enforcement, because that's what law enforcement, that's what the judges, that's what the prosecutors have been saying right along, Democrat and Republican.
Now, a new Siena poll shows Hochul at her highest approval rating ever. Do you think acknowledging an issue like bail reform is behind this? In addition, do you think that the governor is strategically positioning herself as a centrist Democrat and a buffer against progressives in the Democratic Party?
I hope so. I hope so. I do think the LaSalle case, as much as people are paying attention, did help her numbers in that regard, because it looks like she's finally pushing back against what I think most New Yorkers would say are illogical policies put forth by the progressives in both the Senate and the Assembly. So we'll see exactly what is causing that. Now, I think she needs to go further, but at least it's a good start. And I'm glad that, again, part of this is just recognizing the problem, and the fact that she recognized that in her state. I'll give her credit for that.
So Will Barclay, do you think that Kathy Hochul's doing a good job?
I think the verdict's still out there. As I said, I'm pleased that she's recognizing the issues that we've been raising for a long time in our conference. So she does recognize that living in New York is too costly. She does recognize we have a crime problem. She recognizes that people are leaving the state in droves. But ultimately, it comes down to is she going to be able to implement policies to stop those things? And we've yet to see it, but at least she's recognized it. But I really want to see when this year will bear it out. We'll see what she puts in the budget, her budget proposal, and we'll see what kind of political capital she uses to maybe push back on bail reform, raise the age, etc.
So, well, let me read some words to you that you uttered. Many of the governor's proposals fail to strike at the heart of our worst economic realities, and it does not appear she has any interest in curbing the out-of-control spending we have seen in recent decades under majority leadership. Can you be a little bit more specific about that?
Well, I can. I mean, last year we passed a budget that was $220 billion, and when you compare our spending in New York to any other state in the country, you'll see we are way out of whack. Even California, which is hardly a fiscally conservative state, I think their budget is something like $260 billion, and they have almost twice as many people in California than we have in New York. And people always say, well, what would you propose? What do you want to cut? We don't even have to cut anything, Alan. If we just slow the growth of spending, we can bring things back into balance. So it's not even a matter of cutting. It's really just we cannot afford to continue to increase the rate of spending in New York that we've been doing over the last, decade. And we got away with a lot of it. We have Wall Street that's, has been good, that helps prop it up. We've got a lot of federal aid that's helped prop up our budget, but that doesn't last forever. And ultimately, I think, as I said, this year, I think we'll probably be all right. But we have these outer years that are going to be really tough from a budgetary standpoint. And we ought to start we ought to slow that growth and increase in spending to make it easier for us in these outer years. And ultimately, we have to start looking at what we're going to do for our citizens. We do tax, any tax that we tax everything. I mean, we tax income, property, you name it, health care, we tax it all. We have to start rolling that back, or we're going to just continue to lose population. And then it builds on it. It builds as you lose population. Obviously, you don't have the manpower, you don't have the tax base here, and just builds it, makes it more and more difficult. So we just have to bring reality, I think, back into our budgeting process.
So isn't it a little, askance, I don't know what to call it, but for us to say we got to roll things back, but we don't really have specific places to roll it back?
I don't agree
you
with
don't
that.
agree.
So first thing we could look at, we sent, looks like potentially, $11 billion worth of unemployment benefits out during the COVID release. That's completely fraudulent. I mean, $11 billion. It's not. These aren't small numbers. Whether that
not chump change,
turns out to be that, or not chump change. And again, I'd say school aid was one of the biggest things we spend money on, which is great. But if we had a more equitable school aid formula where we were actually driving money to the low wealth districts and not to the high wealth districts, we could slow the rate of spending. In that
Will.
So I think often we do things where we spend money and it's really for political expediency and rather than really good public policy, unfortunately.
Well, a lot of people have been saying that for a long time. Give more money to the poor districts and less money to the rich districts. But of course, with being a rich district comes a lot of political clout in terms of your senators, your assemblymen, the rest of it, and somehow it doesn't get done.
Yep, that's true. And that's where we're a very strong executive branch state, and the governor has a lot of power in the budget process. She ought to use some of that capital. And I would support her doing it. I would say publicly support her doing it, even if it wouldn't be politically expedient for me sometimes to do so.
So who's going to be the new party chairman of the Republican Party, the GOP? Do we know it yet?
I don't know. I think, obviously, I don't have a role in that. We'll let the state committee people decide. But I think it's been announced that Congressman Langworthy will be stepping down as chair in February, so the decision is going to be made soon. And I know there's a number of good candidates out there that are looking to do it.
Assembly committee meetings will finally be televised. Now, you say that it's a welcome and overdue measure of transparency. The Assembly minority introduced this measure prior to 2016 when the law required televised meetings was passed. How come it took 6 years?
That's a great question. I'm not sure why it took so long, but it is a welcome introduction. I guess I said wouldn't be changed. As we'd say, we had that in our rules for some time, but they've never happened. But I think the more transparency is better. And it's often in committee meetings, unfortunately, they kind of, they just go through the agenda very quickly and it's kind of gavel in, gavel out. I think having good, vibrant debate that's transparent and open to the public to see, I think is a very healthy thing. So, again, I'm glad that finally this is being instituted.
Do you really think when Assembly committee meetings are televised that people will watch them? I mean, somebody...
Well...
Yeah.
The truth is, you're right. No one's going to, who knows how many people are going to watch it, but there is the ability for the public to see what happened in committees. So, again, sometimes because the votes aren't there, bills will be pulled because, they don't want to obviously have the bill killed. So I think it keeps everybody honest, and having it recorded, you can always go back and look at the tape. So I think... So whether people sit there and watch it, and maybe a little crazy that way, I would probably sit and watch them, but I don't expect most public would. But just having being transparent, being out in the open, I think that brings a level of honesty and doesn't allow, silly things to happen from time to time when no one's watching. This will put accountability, I guess, into the process.
Now, you wrote a column in which you made the point that restoring contract oversight, state contracts, is a great first step. But more should be done. What should be done, and will it happen?
Well, I talk about accountability a lot because I think sometimes we've lost that in state government. And I earlier raised about the $11 billion worth of unemployment, potential unemployment fraud. It's happened now. We have it with the digital gadgets, with the testing where the governor maybe did a contract for $600 million. There's a suggestion there may have been a pay for play because it was a big campaign donor to you. So the more that we can get oversight, I like the control getting back. We got away from it during the Cuomo administration of COVID. Oversight of the governmental contractual power, I think, is a good say. And you would get away from these potential pay to play situations. So I applaud that being back instituted. I think we could probably go further with it, but at least we're not just having one person making the decision on where the state taxpayer money goes.
Okay, well, I want to ask you very quickly because we're out of time, but the recreational dispensary opened in New York City. As the market continues to open up, aren't there financial opportunities for farmers in New York to grow cannabis?
Potentially, but I always feel like that is oversold. We'll see. It looks like so far the legalization of marijuana has been nothing short of a disaster in New York. I mean, and it's going to be very expensive, I think, for anybody to be selling marijuana, so I'm not sure that the black market won't just be the most productive or economical thing that people will do. So I don't think ultimately marijuana is going to be the economic savior of our state, but time will tell, and we'll see. But so far, it's been a disaster to roll out.
Do you smoke pot?
You've asked me this before. I have, but I don't.
Right.
I told you in Amsterdam, the one place in Amsterdam.
We are out of time. Our guest has been New York State Republican Assembly Minority Leader William Barclay. William Barclay, thanks so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate you putting me on your show.
The Capital Connection is a production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. For copies, call 1-800-323-9262 or visit us online anytime at WAMC.org or just schedule a podcast anywhere you get your podcast. And join us again next week at this same time for another political conversation. Thanks for listening.